2,
Good. I would say evening. It's evening here. It may not be where you are, but welcome to another segment of our ZENtalk from Atlanta Soda Zen Center here in Atlanta, Georgia. To look into our other programs, go online at the website indicated here, ascc.org, and you'll find our full schedule of events and daily and weekly meditation, retreats, and so forth. This is a special program that we put together this year to try to introduce different perspectives on Zen practice in America, where people from different walks of life sort of tell us their story and testify as to what brought them into meditative practice, what maybe finally brought them to Zen, or not finally, hopefully, but currently brought them to Zen. And let us have a little bit of understanding and insight into Zen meditation and its practice. We think Zen is the simplest form of meditation sort of on offer in the public sphere. And we think it has certain advantages, but we're not here campaigning against other forms of meditation. We think all forms of meditation are basically leading to the same point. So we conceive of them as sort of like rivers, tributaries, all ending up in the ocean. And we tend to think of Zen as the ocean. Somebody, I think Ramakrishna said, the Zen is powerful, or the ocean is powerful, because it is beneath everything. So this is kind of our philosophical approach, that our practice of meditation is very fundamental or primordial. So tonight, I would like to welcome.
Oh, did you want this?
Paul Baker. Tell you a little bit about his credentials. Paul M.A. Baker is a Senior Director of Research and Strategic Innovation at the Center for Advanced Communications Policy, CACP, and holds the rank of Principal Research Scientist with the Georgia Institute of Technology. Baker holds a courtesy appointment with the School of Public Policy at Georgia Institute of Technology, and an appointment as adjunct professor with the Center for Disability Law and Policy at the National University of Ireland, Galway. So a new international citizen of the world. And we'll ask him to tell us a little bit more about his background, and wearing Emory insignia, that tells us a little bit. But can you continue with your story of your background? Later we'll talk more about your involvement in Zen.
So I guess I'll start with Emory since I'm wearing the branding. Someone said, why, what was the whole point of a theology degree, a master's in theology? And I said, well, basically at the core, it's $36,000 for no earthly reason, which is either funny or not, depending on whether you get it or not.
Well, theology is not an earthly reason, right?
Oh, absolutely. There is no earthly reason to it.
Heavenly reason.
Yes. I usually tell people, when people say, well, what are you? You do the Quaker thing, you do the Buddhist thing, you do the Christian thing. And I said, well, I've got two ways of looking at it. One is, if you understand how grapes are grown in particularly the United States, they're grown on disease-resistant grapes. Like wine grapes.
Yep.
Because there's a fungus that kills a lot of European grapes. Most grapes are grafted onto disease-resistant rootstock.
Oh, yep. So
I tell people that I have Christian roots and Buddhist fruits. Or conversely, on my Insight Meditation profile, it says Quaker / Buddhist / Christian, the ordering of which varies by day.
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of pushback on that. Master Dogen encouraged everybody to do one thing, do it well enough to do it in front of other people. And the metaphor that's often used is in drilling for water, drilling for oil, drilling wells. Do you drill a lot of shallow holes, or do you drill one deep hole? So that's the kind of pushback on that. And I think in America, we have a unique problem, and I'm not putting you in this category, the people who kind of shop the smorgasbord, try a little of this, a little of that, a little of this, and a little of that, and sort of patch together a Frankenstein monster of practice for themselves.
Sounds like American Buddhism.
Huh?
Sounds like American
Sounds
Buddhism.
like American
I'll
Buddhism.
take a little Tibetan here, a little Zen here,
Yeah.
throw a little Vipassana. Ooh, that's nice.
And to some degree, psychologically, I'm not a psychologist, but I think that is criticized, critiqued as a method, like the drilling shallow wells, but also the avoidance of commitment, right? We don't welcome in America the authoritative model of the teacher-student relationship from the old countries. Cult of individuality. We want to be self-sufficient, independent. And again, I think Zen is maybe more amenable to the Western culture in the sense that your relationship to your teacher in Zen can be very casual. Matsuoka Roshi moved to Long Beach when I moved to Atlanta in 1970. And in the intervening years until he died in 1995, 25 years or more, we had this long distance relationship. He would come here, I would go there. And we rely in Zen on meditation as the primary teacher in a sense. And your teacher is more like a coach. So I think the resistance that people have to forming that sort of intimate relationship with a Tolku or with a Rinzai master where you have to study koans every day and so forth is ameliorated by the way Soto Zen approaches this relationship.
That's partly what attracted me to it, actually. My first exposure to Zen was when I was probably 10 or 11, reading Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse's book. And I did Zen early. I started sitting, I think, when I was around that time, on and off.
Did your parents do
No,
meditation?
actually, no. My parents were Episcopalian, and my dad was a psychologist, so he was interested in mental states. So that's probably why I was interested in that aspect of it. But I started there and went through, and I did a thing with transcendental meditation. So I've been always interested in meditative practices. I did Tibetan, insight, and ended up back here again. In fact, I came here when I was in seminary. This would have been 12 or so years ago, and I walked in, and we visit, as you know, Candler visits here, and I walked in. I went. The only other place that I felt this comfortable was the first time I went to a Quaker meeting and felt at home. I felt a similar sense of feeling very comfortable here, and it is a sense of you're just sitting and waiting, right? You sit.
Well, I'm not sure we're waiting. I'd say we're sitting. I would
argue that
as waiting.
I don't know. I look at my watch. I'm waiting for the end of that 30 minutes.
Well, okay.
I think there is a wait.
Okay.
But okay.
That kind of waiting, I guess.
Thank you for the education, Sensei.
Well, Soto Zen, which emphasizes upright seated meditation, has been criticized as quietism and simply waiting for enlightenment. And people who criticize it that way just have not done a lot of sitting, because there's nothing quiet about it, and we're certainly not waiting.
No.
So anyway,
the
pet peeves.
No, understandable. In response to the comment about a smorgasbord, to some extent,
I grew up in a family. We'd go to the Moose Club.
You're Lutheran.
No, we were Protestant, but the Moose Club was the big deal, and they put out these big spreads. Right?
That sounds Lutheran.
So when you think of all that food,
many things to pick from.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that Americans misunderstand, as I understand Buddhism, is, and a similar critique has been applied to Quakerism, which is anything goes. Well, actually, no, everything doesn't go. It kind of looks like that from the outside, but everything doesn't go, and everything is not necessarily useful. And all routes, I don't think, do go to the top of the mountain. Many do.
Right.
but some don't, and there's bad practice.
Yeah, and they can be blind alleys and cul-de-sacs and so forth. But the metaphor of the smorgasbord I like, because I often also think of Zen as like water. You know, it's nourishing, refreshing, but essentially tasteless. You know, it's not like something you can get addicted to, like wine or you know, food.
I had another way of thinking about my own spiritual practice, which is to think of my core spirituality as, again, the water. But water can be ice, and it can be steam,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be fluid. It's still water, but it takes many different forms.
Change of state.
Or form. Intentionally, I use the word form.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit, think back to the first time, you said you were 10, 11 years old when you started practicing meditation, but the first time you came to Zen and started engaging in the Zen meditation. I don't know if that was here or somewhere else.
I've had brief kind of engagements with it over the years. I think probably the first time that I had any formal training, you know, I have academic tendencies for, you know, if you don't have a teacher, that's what books are for, which totally goes against against the Soto tradition.
I don't think it's totally against it. Dogen was careful to say that, yes, the Dharma is not totally captured in the scriptures, but the scriptures are also the Dharma. So I think we take a very balanced position on that, reading, studying is Dharma, is secondary to Buddha's time on the cushion, direct experience, but the two complement each other. And we often use the metaphor of, I often use the metaphor of documentation for an application on the computer. It doesn't make any sense unless you're using the application. But if you're sitting in meditation, then the literature about it can help you find workarounds for glitches and things of that nature. So I think it's an apt metaphor.
That is good, and it has been a useful balance to me, because I did a lot of reading, way too much reading, and there is no, for me, while there is no substitute for just sitting on the cushion, it helps my mind to understand the context or what's supposed to go on or what could go on. Mm-hmm. For me, not everyone, I would not recommend. I mean, a lot of the text, Dogen is complicated, for instance.
He's not all that accessible for a lot of people, but once you get past his style, if you want to call it that, there's nothing quite like Dogen, for me anyway. Dogen Zenji, for the audience, is a 13th century Japanese master who revived, or actually brought this form of Zen to Japan from China. When he was about his mid-20s, he went to China, and he had been ordained at 7, I think, and later at 13. I can't remember all the details, but he was ordained Rinzai. Went to Tiantai, which is a very famous monastery, and studied there. Rinzai was ordained, but the teachings and the practice could not satisfy his fundamental question, which was, if we're already innately enlightened, why is it so hard? You know, why do we have to do so much work? And he went to China, and under Ruxing, or Nyojo sometimes, a Soto master in China, he had a profound experience. And so he brought this style of practice back to Japan. Similarly, Matsuoka Roshi brought this style of practice to the United States. What was in the United States was mostly Rinzai, the D.T. Suzuki, who happened to be one of his teachers. So I see some parallels there. But please go on.
Oh no,
these are all of mine are asides.
Oh, they're all fascinating. They all help. They all shed a little bit more light on the thinking about things. The sitting, I know that for me, and I have.
The first time was when you came here that you actually started practicing Soto?
Practicing, yes. I'd been exposed to it.
Through reading.
Through reading, and actually some training, but it was Rinzai. and it wasn't soto per
Yeah.
se. The first time was an exposure to it, but I know that just in terms of my own practice, which tended toward insight, I think, and
Insight, Vipassana meditation.
Yes, meditation.
Insight meditation.
I've been doing that I've been doing that fairly consistently for 10 years, and I haven't. And this is an attachment, and I'm well aware of it. I haven't missed a day in 8. I mean, I have been traveling, and I'm fortunate enough to travel. I've woken up in the middle of the night going, "What haven't I done?"
Yeah.
And I went, "Oh crap!" So I do it. It's a commitment. It does.
Yeah.
But it has made a huge difference. I mean, it used to be. I mean, I'm very reactive. I have like anger stuff, and driving is really a trigger for me. And you know, why don't you blah blah blah? And I realized after sitting for a while that the reason I was getting so pissed off was because I was making the driving about me.
Yeah.
And it's not about me. It's about simply getting someplace, and you simply get there.
Well, in a way, I think it is about me in the sense that I'm blaming everybody else for my situation, as if I have no choice.
It's saying that it's saying that where I have to get is more important than someone else, right? That's why I'm upset about it, because they're impeding my movement. And one of the things that an example of your change of frame that's really important is if some adult runs out in front of your car, you get really pissed off at them. But if a child runs in front, you don't, right? You don't have the same reaction. It's the same thing, but the difference is what you map onto it. And I think that has been really important for me, is to try to think about. For me, my practice has been very much about developing patience and not attaching.
Well, you mentioned anger, and I just want to say a brief thing about that. When the kids run out in front of the cars in traffic, mom is angry, right? Her reaction is anger. And so in Zen, we say, watch the anger arise. We don't say anger bad, right? Anger is not always ego. And anger is often felt and even expressed around something you're trying very hard to protect.
Sure.
So we have Dharma arguments, and design. I'm a design professional. We have design arguments where you're fighting for your idea in a group setting, and they can get very loud and raucous, and sometimes full of ego, But what happens is you end up with a better design for the client or for whatever purpose it is.
Design thinking.
Design thinking. And you get arguments around Dharma. And we've had people get into fights over Dharma, and because each person is trying to defend what they think is the right thing to do.
Sure, but isn't that an attachment?
It's an attachment, but I don't think all attachments are bad. I don't think Buddha taught that mom should not be attached to her kids. I don't think Buddha taught non-attachment to caring. It was more non-attachment to your own ideas about it. You're just in for suffering, and you're trying to not suffer. Examine that closely, and you can see you're attached to the idea that you should not be attached.
I probably should have used
twisty.
I should have used reactivity rather than attachment.
Yeah.
Which is it gets a little bit closer.
Yeah. Tell us more about
what concerns me.
Tell us more about what you mean by that.
So, for instance, I'm a political scientist and Latin, so I'm quite passionate. And I used to get into unbelievable political fights with people. And since I've been practicing, I'm now at the point where I find myself able to be sympathetic to people who I utterly don't like or disagree with. But that's okay, right? That's their thing is their thing. Or watching friends of mine who are very, as I am, fairly liberal, lose their crap over something that someone said or did. And I think, why? I mean, why lose your crap? But why lose it, right?
It could be because they're trying to defend something precious to them.
But so is their opponent. It's precious to them as well, right?
And this comes down in Zen to skillful means. How well are you able to apply wisdom in the midst of passion or compassion, suffering with the other person, and seeing their point of view as their form of suffering and yours as your form of suffering, and so forth.
But it has, and my coworkers, I have been fortunate enough to be in the same center for about 16 years.
The same center.
at Georgia Tech.
Oh, okay.
About 16. I left a couple times.
And
So
which center is
the
that?
Center for Advanced Communications Policy.
Okay.
So, and I've had people say, you know, you've really changed lately, meaning the last 8 years. I said, well, it takes a while, I think, to work, but it does. It has made my life a lot. I'm not happier because I'm not seeking happiness, but it has made my life a lot easier. And I think it's made the people around me easier.
Yeah.
An example, real quickly, riding a horse. If you're really tense, you are not only tense, you're making the horse tense.
Right.
And the horse will react.
Yeah, they feel it.
And I think that if you are reactive in your environment, you're making everyone around you react as well.
Right.
And that's what I seek to
vibe.
Yeah, I've been trying to like chill it out a little bit.
This is an important point for Americans to understand that.
No, it's not.
No, I mean that
It's a joke.
in a broader
It's a Dharma
sense.
joke.
In a broader sense, I think of people as like flowers. We're unaware of our own beauty, and we're blindest to our own strengths as well as blindest to our own weaknesses. And when we start practicing Zen, that's kind of what we tune into. We start seeing everything in the mirrors, in good, bad, the ugly, including ourselves. And so I think that goes with us when we leave the meditation place and go to the office and go to work. And we have a lot of stories of people coming into our interview, which we call dokusan in Japanese, a one-on-one interview, saying, I got promoted at work. And they promoted me because they say I'm so good at working with everybody, and that's not me. You know, I'm the troublemaker. I'm the one. So what happens, I think, is you change, and you don't know that you've changed, but the people around you see it sooner than you do, often.
And well, yes, no, and maybe. I think changes. Well, if it happens, that's good. But one of the things that I find most distressing, I'm particularly fascinated by the whole secular mindfulness movement, which concerns me a little bit because to some extent, stripping mindfulness, I study technologies, it's what I do. And from Western standpoint, meditation is a very powerful set of technologies. They're tools. And you don't give a child scalpels to play with, because they can hurt themselves and other people. And I think to some extent, secular mindfulness, while very powerful, you just don't, there's a reason why you don't walk into a drugstore and buy prescription drugs off the counter, right? You have to know what you're doing because there can be harm.
Yeah.
And this is one of my concerns, is that secular mindfulness is not a magic thing that works the same way for everyone perfectly, like going to the gym, right? If I have a heart condition and I go on a treadmill, I could have a heart attack. It's good for a lot of people. And I think that mindfulness, and particularly Buddhist mindfulness as unanchored from a certain kind of map, a Buddhist map. And I think this is the problem, and from my understanding of the studies that have been done, there is a linear, not necessarily linear, there is a relationship between time on the cushion. And I think as meditators, as meditation in the West, people have been doing it for long enough, they're going to hit that point at which they're going to start having the openings and the things that occur that the technologies are designed to do or correlated with. I think you can have a lot of people having experiences they have no way of processing. Well, this disturbs me.
I'm come at that from both sides. I think there's in the area of psychology, you hear a lot of this kind of anxiety about people doing meditation, and you better have a therapist connected to you by your umbilical cord, because you're going to run you're going to run into repressed, suppressed, memories and stuff that you're not going to be able to deal with. So I don't go that far. But I do agree that mindfulness is the sort of, trend du jour or whatever, fad, that's come up, the Oprah Winfrey-esque kind of new shiny object. And did you get it? I get it. Do you get it? That kind of thing. So it lends itself to some of our worst tendencies. But in Zen, it's called, or we would ask the question, mindfulness of what? If it's just mindfulness of being in the present moment, this is what is called the Zen sickness of falling into the moment. And it denies the three times. It denies karmic consequence through the three times. So in Buddhism or Zen in general, that kind of mindfulness is considered to be a problem. But I'm not as paranoid about it as maybe some people in the psychology community, where they have an extra grind and they have a program to sell. You know, stay in touch with me and I'll keep you from going crazy. But I think Zen has a more trusting mind, trusting about the mind, than say science on that level, or even religion or theism on the other end. And you know more about that than I do, where it turned the beast loose and we're all going to suffer, right? So Zen is in the middle, I think, where we trust the mind. And so something like mindfulness meditation, my way of thinking, even Vipassana, all the other forms, are not only tributaries to the ocean, but they're feeders to Zen. Matsuoka Roshi used to say people go through life with something missing. They eventually come to Zen to find it. But I think Zen is so basic and fundamental that unless a person gets suicidal or something happens, well, their experience in meditation can bring them to a deeper form of meditation eventually.
There is, I mean, in Japan, there is something recognized, a condition recognized as Zen poisoning and Zen sickness, right? It does happen.
It does.
In which
and here
the technologies have worked exactly as they are supposed to,
right.
And the individual turns out not really to be ready for it.
That's right. And this is one of the marks, or one of the concerns with Rinzai, so driven. And we are already too driven. This was Matsuoka's point. The Soto Zen is more laid back, villagers, farmers Zen, sort of just relying on sitting.
You know, for me, it's equivalent of Quakerism to Christianity, right? It's kind of laid back and just sitting, which is why you find actually in my other spiritual frame, which is in Quakers, there are a lot of Buddhist Quakers, a lot of Jewish Quakers, and
sure, same in Zen.
Yeah, well, other way around, right?
Yep.
And I think that's one of the, to me, that's one of the powers of the Zen approach is we have, for me at least, there's so much, I live in my head a lot as an academic. This is a place I can come and I like just stop, you know, stick a stick in the machine and stop the wheels for a bit.
And most people in America, I think, don't think that's possible. They've never done it in their lives.
You want to scare people? Have them come to a Quaker meeting. 5 minutes into it's like, what's happening? Nothing. It's not supposed to. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. And so why for sitting on a cushion is probably easier for me than it would for other people, because I'm used to sitting quietly.
Not something we do in public very much. So before we turn to questions,
oh my goodness,
would you what would you like to say as kind of a summary statement for the audience and your encouragement to them?
Oh, I was trying to think about what I wanted to, and I realized that the more that I sit, the more that I realize that there's a lot to learn, but B, it doesn't matter if you don't learn it. You don't have to learn everything, and that's where the present moment thing is. You don't have to know everything. I come from a world at which you are experts in things, but that's okay that you don't know things. And
and I think Buddhism has this implication that awakening or enlightenment means you know everything. The way I think of it, Buddha sat down admitting in all humility that he didn't know. He knew a lot for his time, and he was very educated, but he didn't know what he absolutely needed to know. So the way I think about what we do in Zen, the knowing, is we finally begin to learn what we really need to know. And ironically, the process seems to be unlearning all the stuff we think we know. So anything else on that? We'll turn to the audience.
No, I've got nothing.
Okay, good. So anybody have questions for Paul you would like to bring up?
I'll go. I don't want to get too into ideology, but I know, but you are politically active. I mean, but like in the sense that you.
I'm politically aware,
But
perhaps.
it's part of your job,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's
No, I do public policy, which is different than politics.
Okay.
Public policy is the instrumentation, the translation of political will. You can say, I want clean air, but the question is, how do you get clean air? Well, we implement these standards, we put these filters there. So public policy is the discipline that turns ideas into action. And then the next discipline over is public administration, which are the people who actually do the stuff. Policy is instrumentation frame.
And I worked as a co-chair of the Fulton County Interfaith Commission for a year, Interfaith Coalition. And that's part of what we're developing is policy for churches and for different places around food and around things like that. The interesting thing about policy that I found is not like politics, where politics is kind of all over the map, but policy gets to be, you have to express it in words, and you sort of have to nail it down.
To me, policy is about looking at
precise,
but also it's about alternatives, because as a rule, policy analysts do not make policy. They present alternatives, and then an elected official makes a decision. This is where you switch from an objective policy analyst to an advocate, which I'm not an advocate. I don't do advocacy because I lose the ability. As one does advocacy, if you're not careful, you begin to shut down and lose ability to be objective and to see all sides. And you have to be able to see all sides, even reprehensible ones, because if you can't see a reprehensible side, you can't understand what a possible option, as bad as it is.
So what role does your religiosity play in your policy crafting?
That's a complicated one. As a rule, my primary policy grounding is economics. I look at cost benefits and resource flows. Ideology, or as I tell people, I don't do normative. I'm an empirical social scientist. I look for data. I interpret data. When people say, well, should we do this? I say, I can't answer, should we do this? Because should is a belief structure. I don't do belief. I do data. Is that a cop-out? No, it's a frame. It's a way of looking at the world. Engaging in normative conversations, the stuff of philosophy is normative frequently. It's just a different way of
explain a little bit what normative means?
Normative is a belief structure. So, for instance, an example in politics of normative is big government is bad as a normative statement. Big government might or might not be more efficient than little government, and you can test for that. But big government is bad. I can't do anything with it. You can't do anything with it. It's a belief. It's not rebuttable. It's a belief. So for me, my religion and my spirituality to help me remember not to that in presenting arguments that you present fact-based arguments. Now, even facts are interpretive, and in a postmodern sense, one could argue there is no such thing as objective facts, but they are comparatively objective. Mm-hmm. No one's going to argue that light switches don't work. They do work. I mean, that's oppressive, phallocentric, male-dominated logical approach to the world, but yet light switches still work. On the other hand, if something should or should not be done is a whole different issue, and it's a longer conversation than we have tonight.
Interesting. There's a metaphor from Buddha's life, or not a parable, maybe. It's supposed to be a true story, that he was consulted by a tribe that was considering waging war on another tribe.
Yes.
And they asked his advice on that, and he said, well, will both sides be better off after the war? He didn't say war bad. He just said, if both sides are better off after the war, then it can be considered a just war. And so how would you know? That's an evidence-based conclusion. You'd have to have the evidence.
You would. An additional consideration is, most people are familiar with the term prisoner's dilemma. And humans are graspy, and, humans are
drafty,
graspy, yes,
okay.
Desire.
We're a little drafty too.
and crafty. But I mean, there's economic research that say that people would be willing to give up $1 if they could keep someone from getting $10 because they only got one.
Yeah.
Well, but this is one of the problems of policy is, are you better off? Yes, but they're much better off, and I don't want them to be much better off. So I'm willing to lose everything just so they don't get everything. And this is one of the problems that policy deals with. How do you balance these different interests?
Yeah. Yeah. So anybody else? Okay. So let's, we have time to do just a concluding remark, and I wanted to appreciate your being here tonight, Paul. And I had my eye on you for a while, and I knew a little bit about your background, so I thought, this is an interesting guy. There's somebody we should interview. Is there anything we did not talk about tonight that you feel maybe is important to your story, and that particularly in relation to your spiritual path?
No.
Good. Well,
thank you.
Thank you for being here. We invite you to join us again. We do this every Thursday within reason. And these are posted on YouTube. They are on our Facebook page. And we do, I believe, live streaming on Mixler. So those in the audience, if you cannot be here live for these on Thursday evenings here in Atlanta, if you can, we start at 6:30 with meditation until 7:15, and we break, and then we have 7:30 to 8 is the time for the interview for our guest. And our guest today again is Paul Baker, and we appreciate your being here. Good.